A Vampire Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. When Everything Breaks. The white roses smelled like funeral flowers. Josephine Hartford noticed this as she stood at the altar, her vision tunneling around Harrison Webb's face, his smile sharp and proprietary, as the priest droned through vows she had already practiced 1,000 times. The bouquet felt heavy in her trembling hands, the thorns hidden beneath delicate petals exactly like Harrison himself. Careful, controlled, dangerous only if you forgot to be afraid. "Do you take this man?" the priest was saying, and Jo heard her father shift in the front row. Robert Hartford had paid for everything. The venue, the flowers, the dress that fit her body like a cage. He had also made the decision that she would marry Harrison Webb, a man he knew from business, a man he said would take care of her properly. What her father meant by properly had never been entirely clear, but Jo was beginning to understand it meant the same thing Harrison meant when he held her wrist too tightly while walking through restaurants. It meant belonging to someone. It meant having no say. She opened her mouth to speak the words that would seal this arrangement. That's when she saw Vincent in the back of the church, her older brother, and the look on his face told her everything. His eyes were pleading. His jaw was clenched. He was shaking his head, just barely, just enough that only she would notice. Vincent knew. He had tried to tell her weeks ago that something was wrong with Harrison, that the way he talked about loyalty and obedience wasn't normal. But Jo had been so tired of fighting her family's expectations that she had ignored him. Now, watching Vincent mouth her name, watching him stand as if to stop her, she understood that ignoring something doesn't make it disappear. She began, and Harrison's hand found hers, squeezing. Not quite painful, just a reminder, a promise of what pain would come if she didn't say yes. Jo's hands released the flowers. They fell to the white carpet runner, petals scattering, and she turned and walked down the aisle, while 300 people gasped and shifted and whispered. She heard her mother cry out. She heard Harrison calling her name, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. She heard her father begin to stand, his face darkening with rage. But she was already moving, pushing through the church doors into the parking lot where December air bit at her exposed skin. Her car keys were in her clutch. Her purse was still in the bridal suite where her sisters had been fussing over her just minutes before. She didn't stop to get anything. She ran to her Subaru, fumbled the door open, and locked herself inside with shaking fingers finding the ignition. Behind her, she could see Harrison emerging from the church, his face contorted. He gestured to someone, and she realized with a jolt of panic that he wasn't alone. Security. He had hired security. Of course he had. Harrison didn't like surprises. He didn't like when things didn't go exactly as planned. Jo slammed the accelerator. The roads leading out of the mountain town wound through dense forest on both sides. Snow had been falling steadily all evening, accumulating on the asphalt into treacherous patches of black ice. She knew this road. She had driven it 1,000 times. She knew where the sharp turns were, where the guardrails ended, where the mountain dropped away into nothing. She knew it in daylight. At night, with her vision blurred by panic and the wipers unable to keep pace with the falling snow, the road became something different, deadly. The headlights carved a tunnel through white, but beyond that tunnel was only darkness and the terrible sound of the wind. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She didn't look at it. Another buzz. Then another. She recognized the number on the fourth one. Vincent. But by then, her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely hold the wheel. Behind her, red lights. Harrison had followed her. Of course he had. Jo pressed the accelerator harder, and the car began to slide. She felt it immediately, that sickening loss of traction, the physics of ice overriding her attempts at control. The wheel didn't respond the way she expected. The car wasn't following the road anymore. It was following gravity and momentum, and all the terrible forces she had tried to escape her whole life. The guardrail came up fast. She remembered thinking that this was fitting somehow, that she had run straight toward the only thing that could have stopped her. The impact was violent and immediate. The car broke through metal with a shriek of twisted steel, and for a moment, Jo experienced the sensation of flying. Then there was nothing but pain and darkness, and the sound of the wind screaming through broken glass. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Cold. Terrible bone-deep cold that made her teeth chatter so hard she thought they might crack. Pain in her shoulder, where something had dislocated or torn. The taste of blood in her mouth. The smell of engine oil and antifreeze. She was still in the car, suspended at an angle, hanging in the ravine by the frame that had caught on a jutting rock. If she had hit anything a few feet to the left or right, gravity would have finished what the accident started. The windshield was shattered. Snow was falling directly onto her face. Her dress was torn and dark with blood, and her left arm hung useless at her side. She tried to move, and a wave of nausea made her close her eyes. Don't panic. Don't panic. Don't panic. The mantra echoed in her head as she assessed her injuries. Possible concussion. Dislocated shoulder. Multiple cuts. But nothing that felt like a spinal injury, which meant moving was risky but possible. She was reaching for the door handle when she heard something else. A sound that cut through the wind and the settling groans of twisted metal. Footsteps. Something moving through the snow with inhuman speed, approaching from the direction of the road. Joe's breath caught. Harrison must have called emergency services, or worse, followed her down into the ravine on foot. But when a figure appeared at the broken window, it wasn't Harrison. It wasn't anyone she recognized. He was tall, impossibly tall, with hair the color of midnight that fell to his shoulders. His eyes were strange in the moonlight filtering through the clouds, a pale gray that seemed to catch the light like silver. He wore dark clothes completely unsuitable for the weather, and his skin was so pale it looked almost luminescent against the snow. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Joe was aware that she should probably be afraid. This was a stranger approaching her in the dark, and she was alone and injured. But something about his expression kept her from screaming. He looked surprised, uncertain, almost vulnerable in a way that seemed impossible given the undeniable power radiating from his frame. "Can you move?" His voice was quiet, with an accent she couldn't place, something European and old. "Who are you?" Her own voice came out hoarse. Someone who heard the accident. He studied the car's position with a clinical eye. "If you remain here, you will either freeze or fall when the frame slips further down the mountain. I am offering an alternative. I can call for help." Joe's phone was somewhere in the wreckage. She had no idea if it still had signal or battery. "The emergency dispatch for this area is currently overwhelmed with a 10-car pileup on the interstate. You would wait hours." He extended his hand toward the window, and she noticed his fingers were long and graceful and cold even from a distance. "I have shelter. I have medical supplies. I have heat." Joe's shoulder throbbed. Her mind was clearing enough now to recognize that she was in shock. That hypothermia was a real threat in temperatures like these. That staying in the car was a death sentence dressed up as caution. She reached her good arm toward him, and the moment his fingers closed around hers, she felt his strength as he pulled her through the window frame without hesitation or pain. He held her against his chest, and she realized with distant surprise that he was warm despite the cold. His body temperature borrowed. Warm. Never feverish. Then the mountain wind became a blur of motion, and she knew nothing else. When Joe woke, it was to the smell of lavender and the soft sound of a fire crackling in a distant room. She was lying in a bed that was impossibly comfortable, surrounded by blankets that felt like clouds. Her left arm was in a sling. Pain medication was working through her system, making her thoughts feel distant and strange. She had no memory of arriving at this place. No memory of anything after the man had pulled her from the car. The room was dark except for the fire's glow coming from beneath a closed door. The walls were stone. Ancient stone that seemed to absorb the firelight. There were paintings on the walls. Old paintings in styles she recognized from museum visits. A window showed only darkness and snow. She was alone. Joe tried to sit up, and her shoulder screamed in protest. She lay back down, breathing carefully until the pain subsided to something manageable. Her dress was gone. She was wearing a soft gray sweater that smelled of cedar, and something else. Something she couldn't identify but found strangely calming. The door opened. He stood in the doorway, the man from the mountain, and in better light, He was even more striking than she had thought. His face was sharp and angular, all high cheekbones and a strong jaw, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. His eyes held centuries of something she couldn't name. Loneliness, perhaps. Resignation. "You are conscious," he said. "How is your pain?" "Where am I?" Joe's voice sounded small in the vast space. "Somewhere safe." He moved into the room with that same preternatural grace she had noticed before. "Your shoulder was dislocated. I have reset it and immobilized it with the sling. You have 3 broken ribs, multiple lacerations, and a concussion. But nothing life-threatening. How do you know how to do that?" "Experience." He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat with the casual grace of someone who had done this countless times. "I am Adrian Voss." "You are?" She hesitated, then answered. "Josephine Hartford. Joe. Well, Joe." He studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your car is at the bottom of a ravine. The police have found it. They are searching for your body. We have perhaps 3 days before the search shifts from rescue to recovery." Joe felt her stomach drop. "I need to contact someone. My family. My brother." "No." Adrian's voice was gentle but absolute. "Not yet. When you are stronger, we will discuss what comes next. For now, you will rest." He stood to leave, and Joe realized with sudden clarity that she didn't want him to go. "Wait," she called out. "The man who was chasing me. From the church. He won't let this go. He'll keep looking." Adrian paused at the door. In the firelight, his expression was unreadable. "Then we will ensure he does not find you," he said quietly. "Sleep, Josephine. You are safe here. I give you my word on that." He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him, and Joe was alone with the sound of the fire and the terrible knowledge that she had just run away from one cage only to find herself in another. Except this time, she had chosen it. And somehow, that made all the difference. Chapter 2. Refuge in Shadows. Pain was Joe's first conscious thought when she woke. Not the sharp kind that made her gasp, but the dull, pervasive ache of someone whose body had been through trauma. Her shoulder throbbed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Her ribs protested with every breath. There were small cuts across her arms and face that stung when she moved too quickly. She lay still for a long time, watching light filter through heavy curtains. Outside, snow continued to fall in thick, silent waves. The room was enormous, with vaulted ceilings and stone walls that seemed to absorb sound. Paintings hung in gilded frames, and furniture that looked antique occupied the corners like silent witnesses. The door opened without warning. Adrian entered carrying a tray with tea and what looked like soup. He wore different clothes than before, simple black trousers and a dark sweater. His hair was pulled back, and in the washed-out winter light that never touched his skin directly, his features seemed even more sculpted, as if he had been carved from marble by an artist with exacting standards. "You should eat," he said, setting the tray on the table beside her bed. "Your body needs nutrients to heal." Joe tried to sit up, and he moved to help her, adjusting pillows with surprising gentleness for someone with such obvious strength. She noticed his hands were completely steady, efficient, but not cold the way she had feared they might be. They were cool, almost chilled, and impossibly steady in a way that calmed her. "We run cold," he said when she finally asked. "After exertion, the skin can hold borrowed warmth for a few minutes. Friction and blood moving faster than it should. Don't mistake it for fever. I don't eat what I cook for you, but I remember what comfort tastes like." "How long have I been asleep?" she asked. 36 hours. He poured tea into a cup. "You had significant trauma, and your body required rest. Here." She accepted the cup carefully. The tea was something floral. Not quite jasmine, but close. It tasted better than she would have expected. The soup was broth with vegetables. Simple but delicious. And she realized she was famished. When had she last eaten? The morning of the wedding, probably. Too nervous to manage anything substantial. "I need to contact my brother," she said between spoonfuls. "Vincent will think I'm dead. They found your car. They are conducting a standard search." Adrian moved to the window and looked out at the snow. The authorities have concluded it unlikely anyone could survive the impact and exposure. Within a week, they will call off the search. Within a month, they will close the file. Jo set down her soup. You sound very certain about that. I am. He turned from the window, and his expression was unreadable. However, reaching out to your brother now would alert them to your survival and therefore your location. Is that what you want? She hadn't thought about it that way. She had thought only about Vincent's worry, about needing to tell him she was alive. But Adrian was right. If she contacted Vincent, Harrison would know. And Harrison had resources. Harrison had security. Harrison had the kind of obsessive focus on control that made men dangerous. I need to understand what happened, Jo said. How did you get me out of the car? I was traveling through the area when I heard the impact. Your vehicle was not difficult to locate. He returned to the chair beside her bed. You were hanging from the frame by chance. A few inches in any direction, and you would have fallen into the ravine entirely. Your survival was statistical improbability. You're avoiding the question. Jo set down her cup. How did you move that fast? And don't tell me you have a helicopter or four-wheel drive that climbs mountains. I was there. I felt what happened. You moved like it was impossible. Adrian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was deliberately calm. You are safe here. That is what matters. The details of my capabilities are not relevant to your recovery. It was a non-answer. But Jo decided not to press. She had bigger problems than figuring out exactly how strange her rescuer was. For now, she had shelter. For now, she was warm and alive and away from Harrison. She could deal with the questions later. Over the next 3 days, Jo explored the mansion. It was larger than any house she had ever seen, with corridors that seemed to stretch forever, and rooms that opened into other rooms like Russian nesting dolls. There was a kitchen with professional-grade appliances, a library with thousands of books spanning centuries, a gym, a music room with a grand piano that seemed never to have been played. Adrian gave her access to everything except the basement and the east wing. Those areas are not relevant to your stay, he said when she asked about them. Each morning he brought her fresh clothes that fit perfectly, despite him never asking her size. He brought her medications for the pain and the inflammation. He brought her books, asking what she enjoyed reading, and then returning with exactly the right selections. He was thoughtful and efficient, and never, ever intrusive. He also never answered personal questions. She asked his age, and he said old. She asked where he was from, and he said many places. She asked what he did for work, and he changed the subject. By the 4th day, the pain medication had mostly worn off, and Jo felt strong enough to stand in the shower for longer than 5 minutes. The bathroom was attached to her room, all marble and heated stone, with bottles of shampoo and soap that smelled expensive and unfamiliar. She washed blood from her hair and watched it swirl down the drain in pink water. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was bruised across the left side, yellow and purple blooming across her cheek and temple. A cut above her eyebrow was beginning to scab over. Her body was mapped with injuries, each one a testament to the violence of the crash. She wrapped herself in a towel and returned to the bedroom to find clean clothes waiting on the bed. Soft gray pants, a sweater in cream, socks. All perfect, all comfortable. It was like having a ghost servant, except Adrian had given her a bell to ring if she needed anything. That night, she pulled back the heavy curtains and looked out at the mountain landscape. It was beautiful in a harsh way, all white slopes and dark evergreens and the distant shapes of peaks against a star-filled sky. She had never seen so many stars. The city had light pollution that made them disappear. Here, they burned with impossible clarity. She was thinking about those stars when Adrian knocked on her door. "Come in," she called. He entered carrying a tray with hot chocolate and what appeared to be fresh cookies. "You have been confined to this room for days. I thought you might enjoy something more substantial than tea." Jo accepted the hot chocolate gratefully. It was rich and real, made with actual chocolate and milk, not from a packet. She took a cookie and bit into it. Chocolate chip, still warm from the oven. "You made these?" she asked. "I did." He sat in his usual chair. "I find cooking meditative. Are they adequate?" "They're perfect." She ate another one. Thank you, for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. You didn't have to do any of this. No, he agreed. I did not. Why did you then? Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Because I recognized something in you. What? The look of someone who was drowning and had finally found air. Jo felt tears prick her eyes and blink them away. She thought about the wedding, about standing at the altar and suddenly, clearly, understanding that she was about to sign away the rest of her life. She thought about the way Harrison had touched her. Never quite painful, but always reminding her that her body belonged to him. She thought about all the small ways he had isolated her, cutting her off from friends, controlling what she spent money on, dictating what she wore, and how she should behave. My family wanted the marriage, she said quietly. My father said Harrison was stable, successful, that I should be grateful. She took a drink of the hot chocolate. My brother tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. I was so tired of fighting them. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was being difficult and ungrateful. Maybe that was just love, and I didn't recognize it. It was not, Adrian said. Love does not make you diminish yourself. Love does not make you smaller. How do you know? Jo looked up at him. About love, I mean. You live alone on a mountain with no one around for miles. You avoid personal questions like they're contagious. You seem like someone who has made a very deliberate choice to be solitary. I have, Adrian confirmed. Solitude is less painful than connection. Solitude does not disappoint. Solitude does not leave you. That sounds lonely. Yes, he said. It is. He left shortly after, taking the empty tray with him. Jo finished her hot chocolate and settled back into bed. Tomorrow, she decided, she would try to eat dinner in the dining room instead of her bedroom. Tomorrow, she would walk through more of the mansion. Tomorrow, she would begin trying to rebuild whatever was left of her life. But tonight, she slept deeply and without nightmares for the first time in months. The kind of sleep that came from finally feeling safe. The kind of sleep that told her body it could rest because someone else was standing guard. In another part of the mansion, Adrian sat by the fire in his study and watched the flames. He had not told her the full truth about anything. Not about his age, not about what he was, not about the basement door he kept locked, or why he couldn't step into direct sunlight. He told himself it was for her benefit, that she was not ready to know about his world, that the knowledge would frighten her. But the truth was more complicated. The truth was that in 400 years, he had learned not to let people close. Connection led to attachment, and attachment led to the kind of pain that could last centuries. It was easier to be alone. It was safer, except she was sleeping in his home now, and he found himself unable to stop thinking about her, about the way she had flinched when he first approached the car, and then slowly, carefully, had decided to trust him, about the intelligence in her eyes when she realized he was not answering her questions, about the strength it must have taken to run from her wedding. He had spent 400 years believing that humans were brief, burning things, mayflies, temporary. But Josephine Hartford had crashed into his mountain, and somehow, in the debris of that collision, found something in him that he thought was long dead. He wanted to protect that. He wanted to keep her safe. And he wanted, for the first time in centuries, to let someone see who he actually was. He had no idea how to do any of those things without destroying her in the process. Chapter 3. The brother arrives. 7 days had passed since Jo's accident, when the sound of an engine broke through the mountain silence. Adrian was in his study, reading correspondence that required attention despite his general disinterest in the outside world. He heard the vehicle approach, heard the tires crunch on snow-covered gravel. His enhanced hearing caught the door opening, the sound of boots on stone. Someone was at his gates. He moved through the mansion with deliberate speed, not quite running but moving with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to master his body over centuries. Jo was in the library, curled up with a book about Renaissance art. She had been reading voraciously over the past week, working her way through his collection with the intensity of someone who had been starved for intellectual stimulation. "There is someone here," Adrian said from the doorway. "Stay in this room." Jo looked up, concern flickering across her face. "Who?" "I do not know yet. He left before she could ask more questions." Through the front windows, he could see a man standing in the snow. Mid-30s, dark hair, Joe's eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable. This was Vincent Hartford. Adrian opened the door, and Vincent's expression cycled rapidly from shock to confusion to something like desperate hope. "I'm looking for my sister," Vincent said immediately. "Josephine Hartford. There was an accident, a car crash about a week ago. The authorities found her vehicle, but her body was never recovered. I have reason to believe she came here." Adrian studied him carefully. Vincent Hartford did not have the look of someone who wanted to harm Joe. He had the look of someone who had been terrified for days. His eyes were red-rimmed. His clothing was wrinkled. He smelled like coffee and desperation and road dust. "If she is here," Adrian said carefully, "it would be of her own volition. I do not keep people against their will." "I don't care about your intentions," Vincent said. "I need to see her. I need to know she's alive. That decision belongs to her." Adrian stepped back and gestured for Vincent to enter. He led him to the drawing room, a formal space with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Vincent sat on the edge of the sofa, as if he might need to bolt at any moment. "Wait here," Adrian instructed. He returned to the library to find Joe standing, her book forgotten on the chair. She had overheard the conversation through the stone walls. "That's Vincent," she said. "My brother." "Yes, I need to see him." Adrian noted the firmness in her voice. No hesitation, no fear. "You do not have to speak with him if you do not wish to. But he has been searching for you. He seems genuinely concerned for your welfare. Vincent's always been concerned." Joe moved toward the door. "He tried to stop the wedding. I didn't listen because I was too tired of fighting. If he's here now, it's because he cares. I need to talk to him." Adrian led her to the drawing room. The moment Vincent saw her, he stood so quickly that the chair behind him clattered backward. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into an embrace so tight she made a small sound of pain. Adrian recognized it as a fractured rib, reminding her of its existence. Vincent pulled back just enough to study her face. "You're alive." "Jesus, Joe, I thought you were dead. The police. They said no one could have survived that fall. I didn't fall far enough." Joe's voice was thick with emotion. "I caught on something. This man found me." Vincent turned to Adrian, and his expression shifted from relief to something more guarded. "You found her. I heard the accident," Adrian confirmed. "She required medical attention. I provided it. And you're just, what, keeping her here? Playing doctor?" Vincent's protective instincts were rising. Joe could see it in the tension of his shoulders. "Why hasn't she contacted us?" "Because," Joe said firmly, "if I had contacted you, Harrison would know where I am. You know what he's like. You know he wouldn't accept that I left. He'd find me." Vincent's jaw clenched. "He's already looking. He reported you missing. The police have been searching. He's been on the news, playing the distraught almost husband. But I knew something was wrong. I hired an investigator, someone I know who's good at finding information. We traced your Subaru's plate across highway cameras and narrowed the grid to this mountain road. From there, we followed layered corporate records until they all pointed to this property. I've been searching for 3 days." "How did you find the actual location?" Adrian asked. He was interested in this answer because it would indicate how many other people might follow the same trail. Your property is registered to a corporation, but corporations have people behind them. People who leave records. People who have been paid. Vincent looked Adrian directly in the eye. "I'm not asking how to hurt my sister or turn her over to the man chasing her. I'm asking because I need to know if anyone else can follow this trail." Adrian respected the question. It suggested intelligence and genuine protective instinct rather than possessiveness. "The corporation is several layers removed from me personally. Your investigator found what took effort. Most would not. However, Harrison Webb is not an ordinary man who would hire an ordinary investigator. If I were you, I would ensure your own security measures are adequate. In other words, yes, he could follow the same trail." Vincent translated. "Potentially." Vincent turned back to Joe. "You can't stay here indefinitely. Eventually, someone is going to find you. What's your plan? The police think you're dead. Your family thinks you're dead. But that won't last forever. Eventually, Someone is going to put together that you're alive, and Harrison is going to escalate his search." "I know," Jo said quietly. She looked at Adrian, and he saw the moment she made a decision. "But I'm not leaving yet. Not today. Jo, Vincent, listen to me." She took his hand. "A week ago, I was being forced to marry a man I was terrified of. I was drowning, and then I crashed. And I woke up somewhere safe. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. I feel like I have a chance to figure out who I am when no one is controlling me. I need that time. I need it." Vincent looked at Adrian, then back at his sister. "How long?" "I don't know yet. You can't stay at the wedding forever," Vincent said gently. "Eventually, you're going to have to deal with reality, with the police, with Harrison, with Dad." "I know." Jo squeezed his hand. "But not today. Today I just need my brother to know I'm safe. Can you give me that? Can you let me have that?" Vincent's expression softened. He pulled her into another embrace. Over her shoulder, he looked at Adrian with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and warning. "If you hurt her, I will find you. I don't care how you disappeared before, or how wealthy you are. I will spend the rest of my life making you regret it. I would expect nothing less," Adrian said. They talked for 2 hours. Vincent told Jo about the search, about the police investigation, about how Harrison had gone on local news claiming to be devastated. He told her that Vincent had been gathering evidence about Harrison's behavior with his ex-partners, trying to build a case that would hold up if Jo ever decided to take legal action. He told her that their mother was taking sedatives, that their father was furious, that the wedding venue had already been cleared out, and the vendors paid off. But Vincent also listened when Jo talked about the crash, about waking up in Adrian's home, about the kindness she had been shown. He listened to her explain why she couldn't leave yet, why she needed to recover not just physically but emotionally from the trauma of Harrison's control. When it was time for Vincent to leave, he made Adrian promise to contact him if anything changed. He left phone numbers and email addresses and instructions for reaching him at any time, day or night. He held Jo one more time at the door. "I love you," he said. "Whatever you need, I'm here. I love you too," Jo replied. "Thank you for finding me." After Vincent left, Jo and Adrian stood in the foyer, watching snow begin to fall again. "He loves you," Adrian observed. "He does." Jo turned from the window. "And he's right, you know. I can't hide here forever. Eventually, I'm going to have to face what happened. I'm going to have to deal with the police and Harrison and my family. But right now, I need to be somewhere that Harrison can't follow. Somewhere that's mine. This place is yours," Adrian said quietly. "For as long as you need it." "Why are you doing this?" Jo asked. "Really, not the convenient explanation about hearing an accident. Why are you helping me?" Adrian considered the question carefully. "Because I recognize in you something I thought was extinct in myself. The desire to be free. The willingness to fight for it, even when the cost is high." He paused. "Because helping you matters more than maintaining my own distance from the world, and that terrifies me." Jo looked at him, really looked at him, and saw for the first time the vulnerability beneath the controlled exterior. She saw someone who had spent centuries alone because connection had hurt too much. Someone who was taking a risk by letting her stay, by being kind to her, by showing her that another kind of life was possible. "Thank you," she said, "for answering honestly." "You deserve honesty," Adrian replied. "About everything. Eventually. But not today." Tonight, Jo ate dinner in the dining room instead of her bedroom. Adrian sat across from her at a table that could have seated 30 people. They talked about books and music and the mountains. They talked about everything except Adrian's nature and Jo's future. They talked around the important things, building a tentative connection that felt fragile and precious. When Jo finally retreated to her room that night, she stood at the window and thought about Vincent's warning and Adrian's vulnerability and her own desperate need to feel like she belonged to herself. She thought about the weight of her old life and the lightness of this new space. She thought about the terrifying freedom of not knowing what comes next. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin exploring the rest of Adrian's home. Tomorrow, she would push against the boundaries he had set. Tomorrow, she would start asking the questions that neither of them had yet been brave enough to voice. But tonight, She simply allowed herself to rest in the knowledge that someone cared enough to find her. Someone cared enough to keep her safe, and that had to be enough for now. Chapter 4. Truths and Threats. The question came without warning on Jo's 14th day at the mansion. She was in the library, reading by the window overlooking the snow-covered peaks, when Adrian entered with afternoon tea. This had become routine. He would appear with something warm to drink, and they would talk for hours about books and philosophy, and the small details of their lives that didn't require vulnerability. "What are you?" Jo asked, setting down her book. "And please don't tell me you're just wealthy and eccentric. I want the truth." Adrian set down the tea with careful precision. "Why do you ask now?" "Because I've had time to notice things." Jo turned to face him fully. "You don't sleep. I've walked through this house at 3 a.m, and you're always awake. You're always moving. You never eat the food you prepare for me. Your skin is too cold. Your eyes catch light in ways that shouldn't be possible. And you found me in the dark during a snowstorm moving faster than any human should move." Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the mountains. "If I tell you, you may ask me to leave. You may fear me. You may decide that safety with a stranger is not worth the cost of knowing what that stranger actually is." "I know," Jo said quietly. "Tell me anyway." "I am a vampire," Adrian said without inflection. "I have been alive for 417 years. I do not sleep because I do not require sleep. I do not eat human food because I sustain myself on blood. I move with speed and strength that exceeds human capability. I cannot exist in direct sunlight. I cannot be killed by conventional means. I am the oldest vampire in this region, and I command the others of my kind. Sunlight is simple. Direct exposure burns. Shadowed rooms and winter light behind curtains do not." Jo's breath caught, but she did not move away. She did not scream. She sat with the information, processing it the way she processed everything else, by accepting it, by adjusting her understanding of the world to accommodate this new reality. "Why save me?" she asked. "If you drink blood, why not?" "Because I choose not to prey on innocence," Adrian interrupted. "I hunt with purpose. I hunt those who deserve to be hunted. Your blood is not currency to me. Your life is not a resource." He turned from the window. "You asked what I am. Now you know. Do you wish to leave?" Jo considered it honestly. She thought about fear and safety, and the strange trust that had built between them over 2 weeks of kindness. She thought about how Adrian could have harmed her at any point, and instead had only protected her. "No," she said. "I want to stay." Adrian's expression remained controlled, but something shifted in his eyes. Relief, perhaps. Or something deeper that he quickly concealed. "Then we should establish boundaries," he said. "There are areas of this property you will not enter. There are things you will not ask about. There are—" The sound of an engine interrupted him. Both of them froze. Vehicles did not come to this property. Adrian had been very clear that visitors were rare and always announced. Adrian moved to the window with inhuman speed. His jaw tightened. "Harrison Webb." Jo felt her stomach drop. "He found me? He found this location." Adrian was already moving toward the door. "Stay here." "No." Jo stood and followed him. "I'm not hiding anymore." "I'm done hiding," Adrian wanted to argue, but there was steel in Jo's voice now. Steel that hadn't been there before, forged in the past 2 weeks by safety and autonomy, and the knowledge that she had survived. They descended to the foyer as Harrison's security team was already attempting to enter through the front door. There were 5 of them, all large men with the bearing of private military contractors. Behind them, Harrison Webb stood in an expensive coat, his handsome face twisted with anger and possession. Adrian opened the door before they could force it. "Josephine is not available," he said calmly. "She damn well is," Harrison spat. "She's my responsibility. She's confused and traumatized. She's been kidnapped by some psychopath and convinced herself she's safe. I'm taking her back where she belongs." "She belongs nowhere that you are involved," Adrian replied. "I suggest you leave." "Not without her." Harrison gestured to his security. "Take her." The first man moved forward, and Adrian simply stepped in his way. The man tried to push past him, and Adrian moved him aside as if he weighed nothing. The second man tried from a different angle. Same result. Within 30 seconds, all 5 security contractors were on the ground, conscious but unable to move. Adrian had not broken anything. He had not drawn blood. He had simply reminded them of the difference between human strength and something else entirely. Harrison's face went white. "What the hell are you?" "Someone you do not want as an enemy," Adrian said. "Leave, now. And take your men with you." "This isn't over," Harrison snarled. "I'll expose you. I'll tell the police about this place. I'll tell them about what you are. You think you can hide what you are from the world forever? I have been hiding for 400 years, Adrian said. I am very good at it. Then I'll make sure nobody believes you exist at all, Harrison continued. I'll contact the FBI. I'll tell them about kidnapping. I'll tell them about abuse. I'll tell them about the strange man in the mountains who doesn't follow basic human laws. Nobody's going to believe the word of a lunatic over an upstanding businessman with resources and influence. You are correct, Adrian agreed, which is why you will not be making any contact with authorities. He moved with the speed that Joe was beginning to recognize as his true nature. He had Harrison against the wall with a hand at his throat, not choking, but absolutely immobilizing. Harrison's security contractors tried to move, and Adrian did not even look at them. They remained frozen in place, as if held by precision that made resistance pointless. You will return to your home, Adrian said quietly, his voice carrying an undertone that made Joe's skin prickle. You will inform your investigators that the search for Josephine is over. You will inform the police that you have decided not to pursue legal action. You will withdraw the missing persons report. And you will never, ever, attempt to locate her again. I won't do any of that, Harrison gasped, fighting for air. You will, Adrian said, or I will ensure that every piece of evidence of your abuse, every deception you have perpetrated, every threat you have made finds its way to authorities who actually care about justice. Your friend Vincent Hartford has already begun documenting your behavior. I have resources far exceeding yours. Do not test me. He released Harrison, who stumbled backward, gasping. The security contractors slowly got to their feet, and Adrian gestured toward the door with apparent casualness that was somehow more threatening than any violence. Leave, he said. They left, Harrison included, though he kept throwing backward glances at Joe as if trying to memorize her face, trying to burn his claim into her memory one last time. But Joe was looking at Adrian, at the controlled power radiating from him, at the choices he had made to protect her without destroying himself in the process. When the door closed behind them, the silence was profound. He'll follow through on the threats, Joe said quietly. If he can, he cannot, Adrian replied. I have been managing the supernatural world's relationship with humans for longer than your government has existed. I know how to erase records. I know how to make people forget they ever saw something unusual. I know how to ensure that his threats have no foundation. He turned to her. You are safe from him, because you're a vampire, Joe said, still processing the reality of it. Because I love you, Adrian replied, and the words hung in the air between them with the weight of centuries of loneliness finally breaking open. Joe stepped forward and took his hand. It was cold, but she was no longer afraid of cold. Cold meant power. Cold meant protection. Cold meant someone had chosen to stand between her and the darkness, rather than add to it. Show me, she said. Show me what you really are. No more hiding. No more secrets. Just the truth. Adrian led her through the mansion and down a staircase she had never explored before, past the locked doors he had warned her away from. They descended into candlelit chambers carved from the mountain itself, into rooms that held the weight of centuries, into the places where Adrian Voss, the vampire king, had learned to survive alone. And Joe, who had spent her whole life learning to disappear, finally learned what it meant to be truly seen. Chapter 5. Evidence and Restraint. 3 days after Harrison's departure, Vincent arrived at the mansion carrying a leather folder thick with documents. He met Joe in the library while Adrian was occupied with matters of the estate. Vincent looked exhausted but determined. I've been building a case, Vincent said, spreading papers across the mahogany table. Compiled evidence from 6 women. All of them dated Harrison. All of them experienced the same pattern. Isolation from friends and family. Financial control. Emotional manipulation. 2 of them reported physical intimidation. Joe studied the documents. Medical records. Screenshots of text messages. Handwritten statements from women whose names she recognized from conversations with Harrison. Women he had dismissed as unstable or unreliable when Joe had asked about them. Why didn't they report him? Joe asked. Shame, fear, lack of evidence that would stand up in court. Vincent pointed to specific documents. But together this creates a pattern. This becomes pattern evidence of predatory behavior. I've also contacted a prosecutor I know. She's interested. If you're willing to give a formal statement about what happened to you, what you experienced, we might have enough to press charges. Joe felt the weight of what her brother was offering. Justice, accountability, the possibility of Harrison facing consequences. But she also felt something else. Fear, uncertainty, the exhaustion of reliving trauma. I need to think about it, she said quietly. Take your time, Vincent replied. But Joe, the longer we wait, the more likely he is to cover his tracks. He's already trying to spin the narrative. He's told mutual friends that you're mentally unstable, that you manipulated him, that this mysterious man took advantage of your vulnerability. He's preparing a defense. After Vincent left, Joe found Adrian in his study. He was reviewing financial documents, the kind of mundane business that apparently never stopped regardless of one's supernatural status. When she explained what Vincent had discovered, Adrian's expression remained carefully neutral. You should testify if you wish to, Adrian said. Justice requires witnesses. Truth requires those who experienced it to speak it aloud. What if I can't? Joe asked. What if I'm not strong enough to face him in court? Then that is your choice to make. Adrian set down his pen. I will not pressure you toward revenge or justice if it requires sacrificing your own healing. Some wounds are better left to time than to courts. 2 weeks later, Joe made her decision. She would give a statement. Vincent helped coordinate with the prosecutor. The police took her official testimony about Harrison's controlling behavior, his psychological manipulation, the threats implicit in his touch. It was difficult and painful and necessary. Harrison, unsurprisingly, denied everything. He claimed Joe was unstable, that Vincent had fabricated evidence, that Adrian had manipulated her into making false accusations. His legal team was expensive and aggressive, but the other women were willing to testify. The pattern was undeniable. Within a month, formal charges were filed. Harrison retained the best criminal defense attorney money could buy. The case would take time to develop. But for the first time since her wedding day, Joe felt like she had agency in her own story. She was no longer just a victim running. She was a witness, a participant in justice. During this time, Adrian revealed more of himself. Late one night, he took Joe to a chamber deep beneath the mansion where he kept records spanning centuries. Birth certificates and death certificates. Marriage licenses and divorce papers. Evidence of a life so long that it spanned the rise and fall of empires. Why keep them? Joe asked, studying documents from the 1800s, 1700s, centuries before. To remember, Adrian said. To prove I was real. That I existed. When you have been alive as long as I have, you begin to fear that you might simply fade into nothing, that there will be no evidence you were ever here. You exist, Joe said. I see you. Yes, Adrian replied. You do. One evening, Adrian took Joe to hunt. Not for violence, but to show her what he was in the context where he felt most alive. They moved through the forest surrounding the property, and Adrian tracked a deer with senses Joe could barely comprehend. When they found it, Adrian simply stood beside her and watched the animal move through the snow. I do not hunt animals, he said. This is merely for you to see. My prey is different. Humans? Joe asked. Predators, Adrian corrected. Those who hunt others. Those who abuse their power. Those who take what is not offered. I do not kill innocents, Joe, but I do not pretend to be moral. I simply choose where my hunger is directed. How do you choose? I listen. Adrian said simply. I pay attention to the world. And when I find someone who preys on others without consequence, I provide the consequence. Joe considered this. It was not justice as courts understood it. It was not the system Vincent was working within. But it was Adrian's truth, and he offered it to her without pretense. Do you regret it? She asked. The things you've had to do to survive 400 years? Some, Adrian admitted, but regret does not change the past. I can only choose what I do going forward. Back at the mansion, they discovered that Harrison had attempted to hire someone to locate Adrian's property again. The private investigator had been the same one Vincent had turned to previously. When Vincent learned about the attempt, he immediately contacted the authorities. Harassment charges were filed on top of the existing abuse allegations. Harrison's desperation was working against him. On the night the news broke about the additional charges, Adrian and Joe sat by the fire. Joe was processing the reality that the legal system was actually working, that her testimony mattered, that accountability was possible. Thank you, she said to Adrian. For what? For not killing him when you had the chance. For showing me that power without vengeance is more impressive than power with it. Adrian looked at her with those ancient eyes that had seen centuries pass. I learned long ago that killing the guilty does not make you just. It makes you a killer who has chosen a target. You taught me something different. You taught me that restraint is its own kind of strength. I didn't teach you anything, Joe said. You taught me that I could be more than what I have always been, Adrian replied. That is everything. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the mountains in white, making the world feel isolated and safe. Inside the mansion, Joe and Adrian existed in their own small world, waiting for the legal system to grind forward, waiting for some version of justice to be served, waiting for the moment when Joe would finally have to decide whether she was staying or leaving. But that moment felt distant now. It felt less like an obligation and more like a possibility. Chapter 6. Before the council. The summons came on a night when snow fell so heavily that the world beyond the mansion windows disappeared entirely. A vampire messenger arrived despite the weather, moving through the blizzard with inhuman grace. Adrian read the message without expression, but Joe saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand clenched briefly before releasing. The council demands your presence, Adrian said quietly. In 3 days, at the underground chamber. What does that mean? Joe asked, though she suspected she knew. It means they have heard about you. Heard that I am harboring a human. Heard that I refused to release you when Harrison Webb came. Heard that I am breaking the oldest laws of our kind. Adrian turned from the window. It means I must explain myself to those who believe I have grown weak. Then tell them the truth. Joe said. The truth is complicated. Adrian moved to the fire. The vampire world has existed for millennia on certain principles. Humans are either resources or obstacles. Neither of those categories includes companion. Neither includes love. Then what are they going to do to you? Challenge my authority. Demand I release you. Possibly attempt to remove me as king. Adrian's voice was matter of fact, as if discussing something routine rather than the potential destruction of his rule. I will not allow that. But the cost of refusing them may be war. Joe felt her chest tighten. This is because of me. This is because of me. Adrian corrected. I chose to protect you. I chose to keep you. I chose you over the political necessity of maintaining appearances. He looked at her directly. I would make the same choice 1,000 times. The 3 days before the council meeting were strange and suspended. Adrian spent hours in his study, reviewing documents, making calls to other vampires, positioning himself for confrontation. Joe spent them trying not to catastrophize, trying to read, trying to pretend that she hadn't accidentally become the catalyst for vampire civil conflict. On the night before Adrian had to leave for the council, he took her to his private chamber. It was a room she had never seen before, hidden behind a door that looked like stone wall. Inside, it was surprisingly warm, filled with comfortable furniture and candlelight. On the walls hung paintings that she recognized as masterpieces, stolen from museums, or acquired through means she didn't ask about. If something happens, Adrian said, if the council votes against me, you need to know how to protect yourself. There is a safe house in the city. Vincent knows about it. He can take you there. You will have resources. You will have options. Nothing's going to happen, Joe said, but they both knew she was lying. Joe, Adrian took her hand. I have lived for 400 years never allowing anyone close enough to matter, never believing that intimacy was worth the vulnerability. You changed that. You made it possible for me to imagine a different kind of existence. But if that cost me my position, my kingdom, my power, I would still choose it. I would still choose you. Don't say that, Joe whispered. Don't make me responsible for your downfall. You are not responsible for my choices. I am. Adrian pulled her close. There is a difference between being the catalyst for change and being the cause of destruction. You did not force me to do anything. You simply existed, and I decided that existing alongside you mattered more than maintaining control. The next evening, Adrian dressed in clothes that reminded Joe of the first night she had met him. Dark, formal, imposing. He looked like what he was, a king preparing for battle. He kissed her forehead before leaving, and the tenderness of the gesture broke something in her chest. I will return, he said, one way or another. Then he was gone, and Joe was alone in the mansion for the first time since arriving. She spent the night in his study, reading the documents she found there. Records of vampire law dating back centuries, arguments about human-vampire relationships, old treaties that seemed to forbid exactly what Adrian was doing. In the morning, Vincent arrived. He brought coffee and concern in equal measures. Adrian contacted me, Vincent said. Told me about the council. Told me you might need to leave. Is that what you think I should do? Joe asked. Vincent considered the question carefully. I think you should do what you want to do, not what you think you're supposed to do. That's what you've been learning, isn't it? To make your own choices? But Adrian's going to fight for me. For us. If I leave, it undermines everything he's doing. And if you stay and the council takes him down, you lose him anyway, Vincent pointed out. There's no perfect answer here, Joe. There's just the answer you can live with. They waited together through the day. As evening approached, Vincent made dinner while Joe paced. The waiting was excruciating. Not knowing what was happening in the underground chamber, not knowing what arguments were being made, not knowing whether Adrian was fighting or losing. When Adrian finally returned, it was close to midnight. He was exhausted in a way Joe had never seen him before, as if the confrontation had drained something fundamental from him. But he was also still standing, still whole, still his. What happened? Joe asked immediately. I told them the truth, Adrian said, collapsing into a chair, that I am keeping you by choice, that you are not a resource or a toy or a captive, that you are a person I care about, and I will not release you because a council demands it. And they were predictably outraged. Adrian looked at her. They demanded I release you or face consequences. I refused. I made it clear that my personal choices do not compromise my ability to lead, that if they attempted to remove me from power over a matter of personal affection, they would face war. You threatened war? I promised war, Adrian corrected. There is a difference. I reminded them that I did not become king through popularity. I became king through power and strategic alliance. If they challenge me, they lose far more than they gain. Vincent cleared his throat. Did it work? For now. Adrian leaned his head back. But nothing is truly resolved. They have merely accepted the status quo. If I show weakness, if I fail to maintain my authority in other areas, they will revisit this decision. Then we should leave, Joe said immediately. If my presence destabilizes your position, we should go. You shouldn't have to fight your own people because of me. Adrian sat forward, and his eyes were fierce. I told you once that I chose you. I meant it. I will not exchange you for peace with people who believe that love is weakness. Joe looked at her brother, then back at Adrian. She understood in that moment what it meant to be truly chosen. Not as an obligation or a responsibility, but as a priority. As someone worth fighting for. Okay, she said quietly. Then we stay. Chapter 7. New Foundations. The decision to stay was not made in a moment of passion or desperation. It was made quietly, deliberately, over the course of 3 days following Adrian's return from the council. Jo sat with the choice the way she had learned to sit with difficult things since the accident. She examined it from different angles. She tested its weight. She asked herself hard questions about what she actually wanted versus what she felt obligated to want. On the fourth day, she told Adrian. "I'm staying," she said. They were in the library, the same place where she had asked him to tell her the truth about what he was. "Not because you fought the council. Not because I feel indebted. Because I want to." Adrian looked up from his reading. "You understand what that means? That I'm choosing a life that's unconventional. That I'm choosing you. That I'm accepting all the complications that come with that." Jo sat across from him. "Yes, I understand. Then we begin again," Adrian said quietly. Vincent started coming to the property twice a week. Adrian welcomed him not just as Jo's brother, but as someone worthy of protection in his own right. When Vincent mentioned an incident where someone following the case had attempted to intimidate him, Adrian made a single phone call. The intimidation stopped immediately. Vincent didn't ask for details. "He's scary," Vincent told Jo one evening when Adrian was occupied elsewhere. "He is," Jo agreed, "but not in the way Harrison was. Adrian's power doesn't require him to diminish anyone. He's secure enough not to need control." Through Vincent's legal connections, Jo discovered an organization based in the city that worked specifically with abuse survivors. They needed remote caseworkers. When Jo applied, her application moved through the process with suspicious speed. Adrian had facilitated an introduction, nothing more. But the organization's director clearly understood the value of having someone on staff who had lived experience with controlling relationships. Jo's first week of work was disorienting. She took calls from women in situations similar to her own. Some were still with their abusers. Some had just left. Some had been free for years but were still processing what happened to them. Listening to their stories and offering resources felt like she was slowly reclaiming something of herself. Each conversation was work, but it was also healing. She enrolled in online classes toward a degree in psychology. She told Adrian she wanted to understand the mechanisms of control, the ways trauma altered the brain, the pathways toward recovery. Adrian arranged for tutors when she needed them, but mostly, he simply supported her independence. Weeks became months. Snow melted and gave way to spring. The mansion transformed as the season changed. Flowers bloomed in gardens Jo hadn't known existed. The mountains shifted from white to green. She began to feel less like a guest and more like she lived there. One evening in late March, Adrian found her on the terrace overlooking the property. She was watching sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I never asked if you were happy," Adrian said. "I am," Jo replied. "Is that surprising?" "It is," Adrian admitted. "Happiness is not something I have believed in for a very long time. For centuries I existed in a state of management. Managing hunger, managing power, managing the expectation that I should not feel anything deeply." He stood beside her. "You taught me that happiness is possible, that it exists not in grand moments, but in routine, in knowing someone will be here tomorrow, in having someone care about your day." Jo leaned against him. "I was terrified of trusting again. I still am sometimes. But with you, the fear feels manageable. You've never given me a reason to regret it. I will try never to," Adrian said. "But I am not perfect. I am simply someone trying to be better than I was." In May, Harrison's trial finally began. Jo had to testify. She sat in the witness box and described the pattern of isolation and control. She described the way he had made her feel small. She described the night of the wedding when she realized that saying yes meant disappearing entirely. The prosecutor was skilled and meticulous. Harrison's defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she was influenced by Adrian, that her account was exaggerated, that she was a woman scorned. But the other women testified too. 6 of them. Their stories were too consistent, too detailed, too similar to be fabricated. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. The verdict was guilty on felony stalking and financial crimes, identity theft and credit card fraud, with domestic violence enhancements. He was sentenced to 4 years, which felt both insufficient and like a victory. It was not the destruction of her tormentor. It was accountability. It was the legal system acknowledging that what he had done was wrong. When Joe returned to the mansion that evening, Adrian was waiting with tea and the kind of quiet presence that didn't require conversation. She sat with him in the study, and they simply existed together in the knowledge that a chapter had closed. "What comes next?" Adrian asked after an hour of silence. "I don't know," Joe admitted. "A few months ago, I couldn't imagine a future. Now I can imagine many." She looked at him. "I imagine working with the organization. I imagine finishing my degree. I imagine learning more about your world. I imagine—" She paused. "I imagine a life that's mine. Not because someone else designed it, but because I chose it. That is all I could hope for," Adrian said. May brought warmer weather and the arrival of Vincent with his new girlfriend, a woman named Rebecca, who worked in criminal justice reform. Adrian hosted them for dinner, and Joe watched with amusement as her brother attempted to assess whether the ancient vampire king was truly safe to be around. Rebecca, mercifully, seemed to find the whole situation amusing. "He's not going to hurt her," Rebecca told Vincent firmly after dinner. "Anyone with eyes can see that he'd destroy himself before he allowed anyone to harm her. Stop being paranoid." "I'm not paranoid," Vincent protested. "I'm protective." "Same thing," Rebecca said, grinning at Joe. After they left, Joe stood in the kitchen while Adrian helped her clean up. "Your brother loves you very much," Adrian observed. "He does," Joe agreed. "And he's learning to trust you. That's something." "It is." Adrian dried a plate. "Trust is not quickly given. It is a thing earned through consistency and time." Joe reached over and took the plate from his hands. "You've earned it. You've earned mine too. I want you to know that. I'm not staying because I'm trapped or because I'm afraid. I'm staying because staying is what I choose." Adrian set down the towel and pulled her close. For the first time since the day she had fled her wedding, Joe felt completely certain of her choice. Not certain that the future would be easy. Not certain that complications wouldn't arise, but certain that she wanted to face whatever came with this man, in this place, building a life that belonged entirely to her. The mansion had stopped feeling like a refuge from danger. It had become a home, and home, Joe was learning, was not about location or architecture. It was about choosing to stay with someone who chose to stay with you. Chapter 8. Salvation in Choosing. 6 months after Joe's arrival at the mansion, the seasons had turned full circle. Winter had returned to the mountains, but this time Joe watched it approach without fear. Snow meant isolation, but isolation no longer felt like imprisonment. It felt like sanctuary. The trial had concluded 3 weeks prior. Harrison received 4 years in state prison for felony stalking and financial crimes, identity theft and credit card fraud, with domestic violence enhancements. It was not justice in the absolute sense, not the complete erasure of harm inflicted, but it was accountability. It was the legal system acknowledging that what he had done violated boundaries that society recognized as important. Joe had testified. The other women had testified. The jury had listened and deliberated, and decided that guilt had been proven beyond reasonable doubt. Vincent attended the verdict with Joe. When the judge read the sentence, Vincent reached over and squeezed her hand. Rebecca, sitting on his other side, smiled with the satisfaction of someone who believed in the system and occasionally saw it work. Joe felt relief more than triumph. Relief that a chapter was closing. Relief that she would not spend the next 5 years wondering if Harrison might appear at her door. Relief that the uncertainty had resolved into something concrete. Leaving the courthouse, Joe's phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. "Return when you are ready. I will be waiting." It was the same message he sent every time she left the property. Not demanding, not questioning, simply stating his presence as a constant. She drove back to the mountains as evening fell. The roads were familiar now. She knew the curves and the elevation changes. She knew the point where cell service dropped away, and the world became just trees and snow, and the mountains themselves. She knew where Adrian's property began, marked by a private drive that wound upward through forest. When she arrived, Adrian was in the kitchen. He had started cooking dinner without her. Something he had never done before. It was a small shift, but Joe recognized it as important. He was not waiting passively for her return. He was building routines that included her, but did not require her presence to function. "The verdict?" he asked. "Guilty," Joe said. 4 years. Adrian nodded and returned to chopping vegetables. "Are you satisfied?" "I'm satisfied that the system worked," Joe replied. "I'm not satisfied that he hurt people, but I don't think I'll ever be satisfied with that." They ate dinner in the dining room, and afterward, Joe settled into the study with her laptop. She was working on her psychology degree, and she had a paper due on trauma responses in abuse survivors. The work was heavy, but necessary. Every page she wrote felt like she was transforming her own experience into knowledge that could help others. Adrian worked beside her, reviewing documents related to his businesses. He had a legitimate presence in the world now, shell corporations and investment portfolios that appeared perfectly normal to any regulatory oversight. He had explained to Joe that blending into human society required certain appearances. It required seeming unremarkable in the ways that mattered to authorities. Around midnight, Joe closed her laptop. "I've been thinking about something," she said. Adrian looked up from his documents. "What?" "About staying. Permanently. Not just as something that's happening, but as something I choose consciously." Joe had been processing this for weeks, waiting for the trial to conclude, needing that external resolution before she could fully commit to the internal one. "I want to formalize it somehow. Not marriage, necessarily. I don't need legal documents, but something that means I'm not just a guest who happens to still be here." Adrian set down his pen carefully. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you want to build a life with me. A real life. Not based on rescue or gratitude or destiny. Based on choosing each other every day." Joe moved closer to him. "I'm asking if you'll let me stay. Not because you're protecting me, but because I'm making you happy." Adrian pulled her into his lap with the careful gentleness that had become familiar. "I have lived 417 years. I have been king of my kind. I have commanded armies. I have survived countless wars and political upheavals and personal betrayals." He paused. "None of it compares to this. None of it compares to having someone choose to stay beside me." "Then we're agreed," Joe said. That conversation became the foundation for what came next. Over the following weeks, Joe moved her belongings from the guest room into Adrian's private chambers. Not the bedroom they had used before, but a shared space that was truly theirs. She brought her books and her research, and the small collection of personal items she had accumulated. Adrian made space for her without commentary, simply clearing drawers and sections of shelves as if he had been expecting this transition all along. Vincent arrived on Christmas Eve with Rebecca and a collection of packages wrapped in expensive paper. When he saw Joe and Adrian together, something in his expression shifted from protective brother to someone who had made peace with an unconventional reality. "She's happy," Vincent said to Adrian quietly, while Joe was occupied with Rebecca in the kitchen. "I can see it. She's actually happy." "She is," Adrian confirmed. "I ensure it every day. And you're not going to hurt her? Not going to get tired of her or decide the council matters more?" Adrian turned to look at Joe through the doorway. She was laughing at something Rebecca had said. Her whole face lit up with genuine joy. "I have lived long enough to know what matters. She matters. That will not change." Vincent nodded, apparently satisfied. He remained at the mansion for 3 days, and during that time, Adrian showed him the library, the gardens, the parts of the property that revealed Adrian's nature and history. By the time Vincent left, he had moved from cautious acceptance to something approaching respect. Joe's work with the advocacy organization expanded. What had started as remote casework evolved into her designing a specialized program for abuse survivors. She created training materials and support resources. She consulted with therapists and legal professionals. Her manager, who clearly had some connection to Adrian despite never meeting him, seemed delighted to give her autonomy and resources. "You have a gift for this," her supervisor Marcus told her during a video call. "You understand the psychological dimensions in a way most people don't." "I lived them," Joe said simply. "I know how it feels when someone systematically dismantles your sense of self. I know how it feels to believe you're going insane. I know how it feels to escape and then wonder if you made a terrible mistake. Do you still wonder that? Marcus asked carefully. Jo looked around her study, at the books and the laptop and the window overlooking snow-covered mountains. Not anymore. As spring approached again, Jo enrolled in a master's program in clinical psychology. She wanted credentials. She wanted to formalize her understanding into something that would allow her to work directly with clients. Adrian supported the decision without hesitation, arranging for tutors and resources as she needed them. One evening, as the first hints of green began appearing in the garden, Adrian and Jo sat on the terrace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Do you ever regret it?" Adrian asked. "Not leaving, staying with me, accepting what I am." "Never," Jo said immediately. "Do you?" "No," Adrian replied. "But I worry sometimes that you will wake up one day and realize you have tied yourself to an immortal being while you are mortal. That you will grow old while I remain unchanged. That you will resent me for it." Jo took his hand. "That's a problem for future us to solve. Present me is just grateful to wake up every day knowing I get to choose this. Choose you. Choose a life that's mine. Salvation," Adrian said quietly. "What?" "You said once that I saved you. But I think it was mutual. You saved me from 400 years of believing that connection was weakness." Adrian looked at her directly. "You taught me that the strongest thing I could do was let someone see me, let someone matter to me, let someone choose to stay." Jo leaned against him, and they watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. The world grew dark, and stars emerged one by one in the sky. Inside the mansion, lights came on, warm and golden. Outside, the night settled in with snow beginning to fall again. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They had learned that the most important moments were often the quiet ones. The moments where presence was enough, where choosing to stay beside someone day after day was its own kind of salvation. Harrison Webb sat in a state prison in Hart 1, beginning his sentence. Jo Hartford was building a life on a mountain with a man who had existed for centuries before she was born. Vincent Hartford was planning his wedding to Rebecca, and Adrian Voss, the vampire king, had learned that the most powerful thing he could be was not invincible, but chosen. The story did not end in a moment of perfect resolution. It ended in the everyday, in morning coffee and evening conversations, in supporting someone's education and celebrating their victories, in the slow accumulation of days that transformed rescue into partnership and survival into something that resembled happiness. It ended in choice, in both of them deciding every single day that staying together mattered more than the complications of remaining apart. It ended in the understanding that salvation was not a destination, but a continuous act of choosing to remain beside someone, even when leaving would be simpler. And sometimes, that was everything.